Welcome back to Biblical Bitcoin, where we explore the intersection between scripture, economics, and the philosophy behind sound money. If you spent any time in the Bitcoin world, you know that time preference, the degree to which we value the present over the future, is one of the key philosophical issues behind savings, stewardship, and long-term thinking. High time preference means prioritizing immediate gratification, whereas low time preference means making sacrifices now to build a better future. So today we're going to examine what time preference means in economic theory, how the Bible implicitly and explicitly teaches low time preference, how this shapes Christian views of savings, money, and responsibility, and why this framework aligns so closely with Bitcoin. So what is time preference? Time preference is how much people discount the future relative to the present. Someone with high time preference wants immediate reward. I want it now. Someone with low time preference is patient, willing to save for a better future. Time preference plays a huge role in the trajectory of your life. Debt accumulation, savings versus spendings, risk-taking, investment decisions, economic stability, and personal discipline. Economists like Ludwig von Mises identified time preference as the foundation for capital accumulation and long-term prosperity. High time preference societies tend to crumble, whereas low time preference societies tend to build. So the question is, does the Bible endorse one over the other? The answer is unmistakable. The Bible overwhelmingly teaches low time preference as a means of economic and moral virtue. In Genesis 2, God gives Adam and Eve abundance, freedom, and purpose, but he also gives them one commandment that requires self-control. Do not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. This is a classic test of time preference. The fruit is immediately desirable, the consequences are long-term and invisible, and wisdom in this situation requires delaying gratification. And humanity fails at the very first test. The biblical narrative begins by demonstrating how dangerous high time preference can be. This theme continues throughout Scripture, all the way to Proverbs. Proverbs 13:11. Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. Proverbs 21:20. Precious treasure and oil are in a wise man's dwelling, but a foolish man devours it. Proverbs argues that savings, delayed gratification, and low time preference leads to prosperity and stability. In Matthew 25, Jesus tells a story of 3 servants entrusted with resources. 2 of them invest the money, exercising patience and diligence, but the other one buries his talent, choosing safety and immediacy over responsibility and long-term growth. The lesson? Faithfulness is a long-term process. Also, God honors those who steward their resources wisely over time. Jesus frames stewardship here as inherently long-term. Let's bring it back to Genesis when Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dream and comes up with the first national savings plan. During 7 years of abundance, Egyptians store grain. During 7 years of famine, Egypt survives. Joseph's policy is essentially save in the good times to prepare for the difficult times. And the result? Egypt becomes one of the most stable economies in the ancient world. Let's look at some of the biblical critiques of high time preference behavior. Scripture repeatedly warns against debt, impulsive decisions, greed, short-term gratification, consumption without savings, and quick wealth. High time preference is associated with moral instability, poverty, bondage, and generational decline. Said it before, say it again. Proverbs 22:7, the borrower is slave to the lender. So how does this relate to Bitcoin? This is biblical Bitcoin after all. Bitcoin is designed around extreme low time preference. Fixed supply, predictable issuance, no ability to inflate, savings rewarded over the long term, and discouraging speculation. Fiat currency systems incentivize high time preference. Inflation punishes savings, debt is incentivized, consumption is encouraged, and short-term economic thinking dominates politics. In other words, Bitcoin is aligned with biblical economic wisdom. We live in a high time preference culture. Instant gratification, constant digital stimulation, buy now, pay later. But the Bible calls us to think generationally, build slowly, steward wisely, and sacrifice for the future. Christians should be the lowest time preference people on earth, because our hope is eternal. Bitcoin simply provides a monetary system that reflects these scriptural principles. Who knows if Satoshi was a Christian, but Bitcoin is designed around biblical principles when it comes to economic thinking. Low time preference is not just an economic theory, it's a biblical ethic. Hopefully this exploration of time preference and scriptural principles has allowed you to think a little differently about money. Until next time, this is Biblical Bitcoin. God bless.